Where does a superhero stand when the world falls apart? Here's your look at the McFarlane Toys Page Puncher's Injustice comic Supergirl. As a child, Kara Zor-El witnessed the devastation of Krypton before she was sent to Earth on a mission to protect the infant cousin Kal-El. Arriving on Earth decades too late, she discovered that grown-up Kal had been imprisoned. Still determined to protect her family and its legacy, Kara will fight her cousin's enemies as Supergirl. She may have been too late for Kal, but she's not too late for this review. Before we get a closer look at the brand new Page Puncher's Injustice comic Supergirl, I'd like to first thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys that has not only provided this sample of Supergirl, but has also provided the samples of the other three figures we've looked at, Green Arrow, Batman, and the recently looked at Dr. Fate. I'm going to bring those figures also in for comparisons in a second. Not to get ahead of myself, though, what I'm going to do first also is to measure off the top of Kara Zor-El's head, just to see how tall the figure stands. Supergirl, in this case, stands 6.5 inches in height, or she's also 16 centimeters tall. As already mentioned, here's what Kara looks like along with the other Page Puncher figures that we've looked at. Here's what she looks like with Green Arrow. Here's what she looks like with Dr. Fate. Here's what she looks like with Batman. Hopefully all of these will fit in frame. Now, before, Batman was the shortest figure, at least of three figures that we had looked at. But now, of course, now that we're going to be about to look at Supergirl, Supergirl clearly is the shortest of the batch. And for accessories, Supergirl comes included with the same Injustice comic book, the same Injustice trading card, the same, though not Injustice, but the same DC logo display stand. What she, though, does get differently, I don't know if you guys can actually see it, those tiny little things that are red, those are tiny little fists that are going to swap out with the existing hands that she has right now. One thing I want to be clean about, come clean about at least, is that this is not the comic that came included with Supergirl. Now, before you start getting your pitchforks and torches, this is actually one I've already opened up. This is one I think I came included with Batman or Green Arrow. I've decided to keep two of them opened. I've decided to keep two sealed, just so I can actually have a couple of these comics sealed away. Not, again, that they're going to increase in value anytime soon, but why open all four of them? If I can keep some of them still sealed and I can get the enjoyment out of reading one of them or two of them, why not just do that? So just, again, flip through the pages so you can kind of see what's all going on here. There's Supergirl battling her cousin. Superman seems to be bleeding from either the mouth or the nose. And a rather interestingly designed, colored at least, Dr. Fate. Hoping again that some of these figures will eventually make their appearances in plastic form. There's the better look there at Dr. Fate. I like the look of that one quite a lot. But yeah, it's the exact same comic as the ones we already got before. Again, right down to one of my favorite pages of the comic is this one right here. Not just with Batman's rogues, but as you can see, Supergirl looks like she's started a battle not only Batman's rogues, but also rogues from Aquaman, Wonder Woman down below there as well. Very, very cool. I'm going to put that to the side. The figure, like already mentioned, comes included the same trading card. It's not really 100% the same. What's different, though, is obviously printed down below is Supergirl. All the other ones would have had their own unique names. And then on the back, not only is a different portrait up the top corner, different name, but then you've also got a different paragraph read you can read for yourself. The figure also comes included with a display stand. I'm not going to spend a lot of time to talk about this. It's a black circular stand with the DC logo peg at the top and attached to the underside of the figure's feet. Let's get down to tiny little fists, shall we? I'm going to be careful not to lose these. She comes included with these tiny little hands. I thought the hands themselves seemed a little small, but then I have to kind of think to myself, if I can put the hand up to like the open hand, for example, if for all intents and purposes those fingers were to close shut and make a fist, I guess it would be about the same size, although I feel like it would still be a little bit bigger than what we get right here. To change the hands out, all you just do is wiggle this off, remove it from the post, find, of course, the appropriate hand, drop it, whatever you do, and just plug it back onto the post. And again, just like when you look at the two, it's more just because the optical illusion of having the fingers extended like this. But does it not look like this hand is a little too small to be this hand closed shut? I don't know. Anyways, we'll keep this in place right now. Honestly, though, I would much rather display Supergirl with her open hands. I think there's just a lot more personality going for him. I'm never one that really likes closed fists. In real life or in action figures either. Getting a closer look at the head sculpt for Supergirl. Okay, here's where I stand on this. I like the head sculpt. I'm not crazy about the hair. The hair, for what I could think would be sculpted, is decently done well. I think where my biggest problem comes from is the fact that it's so dark. It does look like they likely have used a darker plastic and then they would have painted the blonde over top of it. And I think in a case like this, even just to go, I don't even have to pull the comic for this, just to pull the trading card, you can see there's Supergirl there on the front. Her locks seem a lot more blonde than what we're actually getting right here. I think I would much rather if they had just painted all the hair more this color and only put a few little strands, because again, I think it looks like they probably have taken the plastic being a darker color and then they brushed over top of it. I think it does make her hair way too dark. And it really does kind of conform around her face. I would have maybe brought these back just a little bit. Now, in case you are curious, I don't know if you guys can actually see that. They did sculpt ears. Not that this is a part of the figure that you'd ever really look at. I mean, how many people are going to be peeling back the hair? But I just did want to show you guys this, that they did also sculpt in ears. So I don't know if they decided they wanted to change the hair. Maybe at one point they had planned a different hairstyle than what we actually get right here. You know, again, I kind of like, you know, to look at the hair here on the trading card. I kind of like the hair to be a little bit more curlier and not necessarily just sort of just draping off the side of her face. You know, the face underneath is pretty, but I think it's almost the hair that detracts a little bit away from that. The one thing I also really like about this figure is the way they've designed the costuming. Whether you are a big fan of this particular suit of Supergirl or not, one thing that's certainly not deniable is the fact that there's a lot of cool color going on here. It's a different type of S, certainly for the front there, the chest that she has, the little crest piece on the front of her chest. I do like the way they've raised the gold and they've recessed sort of the red. So it doesn't just, it's not a case where they just molded this and then just painted the S over top of it. They actually have taken the time to sculpt that. In addition to that, they've also sculpted the shoulder pads. So all the gold that you see here, for example, if you run your finger across it, and you're not here right now with me, it'd be a little strange if all of a sudden these random hands reach around the camera. Hey, who are you? And started just feeling the shoulder pads. But these are actually textured or lifted from the rest of it. So they didn't just either paint those in also. I like the blue that they've used. I also really like the red that they chose also as well. Like the colors work really well for this figure with what little paint that we actually do get. There's gold here on the tops of her thighs, for example, which again are sculpted in. Hey, how'd you get in there? I'm gonna stop running with that joke. This part actually is sculpted on the top of her thigh, and what part there isn't actually painted, they still managed to go in there and actually texture some really interesting pattern work on the actual plastic. The legs themselves, just again to lift up the cape so you can see there's some nice sculpting on the back of her body as well. I always tend to like to lift the capes up so you guys can actually see there's a lot of cool stuff going on that you don't always get the chance to see. Like, for example, her ears, which are right in there once again. The cape is also something that's handled really well. Instead of just giving you a flat cape at the bottom, they actually did kind of point it in the middle, and it's got like a natural kind of curve and drape the way the cape would naturally drape on a figure's body. Like also the way they printed on the S. Now in this case, unlike the S that's on the front, there's no additional molding here. Instead, what they've just done is they painted the S logo over top of it. It kind of reminds me of Electricity's Superman. That kind of logo that he had originally sort of does look very similar here on the cape, and obviously here on the front of her body as well. The lower legs are one thing I'm not super crazy about. These additional boots that she has, and again, it goes back to the designing of the character. But again, like when you look at the design of Supergirl here on the comic cover, she looks like she has fully developed boots all the way around. I'm just, again, quickly flipping through the comics. Let's see if we can actually find a good page of Supergirl here. One at least that shows her legs. Well, there's her legs down below here. Maybe that's not a good look. Let's see if I can actually, oh, wait, was there one right there? Well, there was one right there. That's kind of giving you a better idea. They look like fully sculpted boots all the way around the fronts of her legs. Yet, when it comes to this actual figure, instead of sculpting the boots all the way around, it almost looks as if the boot is turned sideways, as she only has it sculpted on this side and she doesn't have it sculpted on this other side. So maybe there's a costume change that the character does have. It certainly does not look like the way it does on the front of the comic. I'm not a big fan of this. I would have certainly much preferred instead boots, just regular boots, but it's something that's sculpted on this figure, good or bad. Overall, again, it's a nice looking figure. There are a few little things, like even on the blue, for example, there's some nice lighter blue that they've added in there as well. So even there, when you think there aren't parts on the figure that aren't necessarily painted, even things like her torso, for example, has some of the additional blue. It's not until you actually look really close at it that you realize McFarlane's team of painters have really gone in there and painted a lot of cool stuff here on Supergirl's body. I think if anything, of all the three figures so far, well, the three figures prior to looking at Supergirl, I think she actually has the most level of paint that's been applied. Sometimes not always in a good place, like her hair, for example, but the rest of the body actually looks really good on her. For the articulation here on Supergirl, going back to her head once again, the head rotates all the way around. It does look up pretty decently, just because she does have very short hair. The head does look down also as well, and you can move it also back and forth as well. As for the arms, even though she does have the shoulder pads are up here. They're not here, so it's not going to limit any bit of the articulation. You easily can bring the figure's arms out at 90 degrees. You can take those arms and move them forward and move them back. If anything, any little bit of restrictions is actually when you try to rotate the arm all the way around. You can obviously see it's going to be rubbing against the softer plastic that they use for the shoulder pads. The figure does have a swivel in her bicep. The figure does also possess a double hinge on her elbow. The joint in the elbow does result in sort of having her forearm looking like it's a little broken up, with a very off-colored joint sort of in the middle. I'm not too bothered by it, but one thing you will notice, though, is it does result in her elbow being a different color than the rest of her forearm and the rest of her bicep. The figure has an upper torso ball joint. One of the most generous of ball joints of the now 4 figures that we've had a look at. Not only does she have a good generous ball joint at the top, but she also has a secondary ball joint at the base of her abdomen. The lower part of her torso, like with the other 3 figures, the other now 4 figures, has more of a softer plastic that they used here. It's not soft here, it's not soft here, but it's only soft in this section to conceal the joint in the legs. Speaking, though, of the legs, the figure does have ratcheted joints once again on the thighs, so you can swing out the legs. Probably have a good splits, really, here on Supergirl, but you can also then take the legs and move them forward. You can move them back, and just a very, very mild swivel. Not even to the point where I really should have even mentioned it. There's a double hinge, though, on the knee. And for the articulation, like, this boot is just a continuation. While it's molded, you can kind of feel or even see that it's a separate piece from the lower leg. I mean, obviously, there's no articulation here at all. And then when it comes to the feet, they move sort of up and down. But she has this like little lip of plastic right here, which should really be just the continuation of this side of the boot that kind of wraps around. But it doesn't look like it goes to anything. It literally doesn't go to anything. It's just a random piece of strapped plastic that sticks out from the front of her boot. When you do then move her feet back and forth, it does sort of result in this being slightly more warped, and it sticks out more than it did when you first take it out of its plastic prison. The figure does also have an ankle pivot back and forth, and even though she has slightly smaller feet, Supergirl still manages to pull off toe articulation in there as well. I like the figure. Honestly, though, I think I like the figure more now that I've taken her out of the packaging than when I did when I saw her in the packaging. In the packaging, I kind of was a little not crazy about the head sculpt. I think the more that I now have the figure now loose, out of packaging, and now I've spent a few hours now with the figure, I like the head sculpt. I'm still not crazy about the hair, though. And I don't think it's as much the sculpting of the hairstyle. I think it's more the way that it was painted. Because I got to think, if it was painted in more of a lighter blonde, I think it would work better with the head sculpt, especially seeing as she also has a fair complexion. Because they also seem to, in this case, use a darker plastic for the hairstyle, and then they paint it over top of it. It does result in her hair not looking necessarily dirty, but it does look streaky. That's probably the best way I would describe it. One thing missing from Supergirl that wasn't mentioned in this review is the very obvious display stand. Well, she does come with a display stand, but not the one I would have preferred. Instead of giving her a flight stand, because after all she's a flight character, instead they just give her a neutral black display stand. This now is the second figure that we've gotten from this wave, the first one already being the Dr. Fate. I think in both cases the figures deserve to have flight stands. Supergirl may be more than Dr. Fate. Of course, it's always a character, when you think of a character like a Supergirl or a Superman, obviously kind of goes along with that you'd expect the figure to come include with a flight stand. Now, for me at least, it's not a deal breaker, because first of all, I have enough of these figure display flight stands that I can easily use one then for Supergirl. But if you're first time buying this figure and you don't have a big collection of DC Multiverse figures already, then you might miss the fact that this figure didn't come included with a flight stand. I will, though, honestly say that this figure does look better in hand than it did online. When I first saw images of this particular wave, I was actually generally excited, especially for the Green Arrow, because we don't really have a lot of Green Arrows. The Supergirl, I thought, was actually for me at least, the least interesting one that I was interested to have a look at. And yet, now that I've actually got this figure in hand, the more I actually spend time to look at it, the more I'm actually liking the sculpt of the face. Still not crazy about the hair, though. The darker streaks of the brown, I think, detract too much away from the figure's face. And though ultimately, while the figure does have ears you really can't ever see because the hair is draping in front of it, I have to wonder if maybe they had planned to sculpt a different hairpiece on the figure before settling on this one. The hairstyle, again, isn't the thing that's detracting to the figure, it's the coloring that they use for the brown streaks. I think it's rather a case that they probably have painted the blonde over top of a darker brown, but either way, though, it does make the hair look a little bit more streakier than what it should. What do you guys think of Supergirl? Let me know down below in the comment section. And now that we can finally say that we've wrapped up all the reviews of this wave of the Page Punchers DC Multiverse, or the Injustice comic characters, what would you say of the 4 figures is your favorite? Let me know down below in the comment section. Is it Supergirl, or is it one of the other 3 figures we've already had a look at? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. And as always, I'd like to thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did come through and did provide this sample, not only of Supergirl that we've looked at, but the earlier looked at Dr. Fate, the earlier looked at Green Arrow, and the one before that, Batman. They were kind enough to provide the samples of all the 4 figures that we've looked at over the series of 4 reviews. Speaking of reviews, if you enjoyed this review, why not hit with a like? If you guys loving the content you guys are seeing and certainly on board to see more, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below and that you're also turning on the bell notification. There's going to be a lot more videos coming your way, guys, so as always, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.